Identical twins of Reddit. What's the most embarrassing situation where you've been mistaken for your twin? My twin brother recommended a restaurant to me. He said that he and his wife went there all the time. Good food, really friendly staff. So I took my wife there. The food was as advertised, but the service was somewhere between cold and openly hostile, as if they resented our presence. I was puzzled by the contrast between what I had heard and what I saw. Suddenly, from the front of the restaurant, there was an explosion of laughter and rapid talking. The waitress appeared, smiling and cheerful, just as my brother and his wife walked around the corner. They had thought my brother was cheating on his wife with some blonde. Yeah, it is funny now. Story 2. My twin and I don't really get along, and we've had qualms over girls in the past, but as twins, or siblings in general, you sometimes hit streaks where you get along really well. We were in such a streak and decided to hit the bars all night. And his girlfriend came along too. We got home pretty drunk around 2 a.m. While strolling through the house with the lights off, his girlfriend turned around and grabbed my tater tots. For some reason, I started laughing, told her I wasn't my twin, and pretended it didn't happen. However, she felt guilty and told my drunken brother about it, which I totally understand. But then, my brother became so upset that I hadn't told him myself, and he felt like I had betrayed him. He cried and said, "How could you do that to me?" Good times. Story 3. I am not an identical twin, but I am married to one. When I was dating my wife, she and her twin sister had a bunch of friends over. I walked over to my wife, put my arm around her, and she leaned into it. I leaned in for a kiss, but she pulled away. I figured she might not be comfortable with a little peck in front of everyone since we had not been dating for very long. Then I scanned the room and made eye contact with my actual girlfriend. I looked back in shock and realized I had my arm around her sister, who had been messing with me until things went a bit too far. I tucked my tail between my legs, walked over to my girlfriend, put my arm around her, and said, "Well, will you give me a kiss?" Story 4. I went to a party once, and my bald, identical twin brother had yet to arrive. His girlfriend was already there, so I gave her the obligatory friendly hug and then sat on the other side of the room to hang out. A mutual friend of theirs kept staring at me, then at her with this nervous, "What the hell?" look on his face. For about 15 minutes, he kept glancing around anxiously and furiously texting on his phone. Then my brother arrived. He kissed his girlfriend and said hello to everyone, and this guy immediately exploded. Jesus, was no one gonna say anything? What the heck was that? I thought he grew a full head of hair in a day. Eat it. People keep asking. He is bald. Because he shaves his head. My hair is receding, but still there. Story 5. I am not a twin myself, but I am friends with twins. I know 2 twin guys, and one of them happens to be gay and is dating someone. He neglected to tell his brother either of these facts, and he also never told his boyfriend that he was a twin. Anyway, one day, the straight twin and I were walking through the mall when a guy came up to my friend and said something like, "Hey, sweetie, how's it going?" And then full-on kissed him. My friend almost punched the guy, but luckily realized he was being mistaken for his twin. He explained that he was not, in fact, his twin, and the guy looked like he was about to die from embarrassment. My friend and I assured him it was okay, and that it was an honest mistake. We all laughed about it afterward. When my friend got home, he found his brother, and after taking him to a quiet, secluded room, because he wasn't sure if anyone else knew yet, he told him the story of that day and asked if he was gay. His brother confirmed it, and they ended up having a good bro moment over it. Even better, the situation brought them really close as brothers, whereas before, they could barely stand being in the same room together. Story 6. My best friend is a twin, and he ended up in situations like this all the time, but the worst was when he and his brother went to the same summer camp as teenagers. The twin I'm friends with is the older one, super social, kind, and outgoing, while his younger brother has almost the opposite personality and doesn't like to branch out much. They were split into different cabins, and the younger twin started freaking out because he wasn't with his brother. The older one tried to include him in his cabin's activities, but after about a week, everyone in both cabins had become pretty close friends, except for the younger brother. There's this volleyball game they do every year at the camp called AB, where the A cabin plays against the B cabin for a silly little trophy. My friend was in A cabin, and he's a lot more athletic than his twin brother. He felt bad about how isolated his younger brother had become, so he decided to secretly switch places with him and play on the B team. So the older brother pretends to be the younger one and immediately starts doing really well. The kids in B cabin finally start warming up to the little brother, since he's basically the only reason their team is scoring any points. My friend notices that the real younger brother never even showed up to the game, which was pretty typical gym skipping behavior for him. So when the B team finally wins, they all swarm around my friend and try to lift him into the air to celebrate. They aren't strong enough to hold him up for long, but it's still a good sign. They end up half carrying, half wrestling the older brother back to the B cabin to celebrate their unexpected victory. When they open the cabin door, still cheering and holding their silly trophy, they all stop dead in their tracks. There, in B cabin, was the younger twin, Alex, having some alone time with himself. He stuttered and felt bad for his older brother because everyone thought the older brother had skipped the game to go have solo time in a different cabin. The embarrassed younger brother tried to explain that no, he wasn't Daniel. He was just weird little Alex in his proper cabin. But no one believed him. Now, everyone thought my friend Daniel had gotten caught and then claimed he was his twin Alex. Luckily, the secret stayed within the confines of the camp, and no major internet site ever found out about it. Story 7. I am not a twin, but my brother and I look startlingly similar, even though we are almost 2 years apart. I was constantly harassed by teachers, faculty, and other students in grade school and high school for being in the wrong room, or told, "This isn't your lunch schedule," or scolded because I had no idea what they were talking about. Homework, sports practice, whatever it was. What truly takes the cake is that I once had leg surgery in high school, and someone accused me of faking my injury because he saw my brother at practice at night while I was in a wheelchair during the day. He even tried to flip me out of the wheelchair. Do not flip someone out of a wheelchair at school. Seriously. Who fakes broken legs to be cool? Story 8. When we were in the 6th grade, my brother decided to stay home because he was not feeling well. Until then, there had never been a day when only one of us was at school, but I did not think anything of it. I was walking down the hall when a teacher I had never seen before suddenly pulled me aside and started yelling at me. Really yelling, because she believed I had skipped her class and then had the audacity to walk right past her room afterward. It was incredibly awkward to say, I have an identical twin brother. My name is J.S. Wet. Naturally, she thought I was making a ridiculous excuse, and I had to find another teacher who knew both of us to confirm I was telling the truth. After that, she never bothered me again. Other than that, we have never had a truly embarrassing story. Story 9. Embarrassing, I guess. Though really, it was just terrible. We were out with friends, and my brother wandered into one of the back rooms that had been set up for a private party, with bottles of spirits everywhere. He decided to grab a bottle and run off. Cut to me on the dance floor when a couple of bouncers walked up and pulled me into a back room saying, "Oh, you're screwed, mate. We saw you on camera stealing a bottle, blah, blah." I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about, and they were convinced I was just playing dumb. "Stop it, mate. We got you on camera." Somehow, I finally convinced them that I had a twin. They went to track him down and eventually told us we needed to come back the next day to settle the damages. That did not happen. Fast forward about 2 weeks, and I was staying at my girlfriend's mom's house when I got woken up at 6 in the morning. "Hargot, the police are here." "What?" I was arrested and put in the police van, where my twin was already sitting. Interviews, long waiting, disappointing polystyrene lunches. We got off with a warning. Thanks, John. Story 10. My father spent 1 year abroad before returning to enroll in the same college as his twin brother. The first few days were pretty standard. Acquaintances of my uncle mistaking my dad for him. Business as usual. That was until one girl approached him, publicly, no less, and with a wink said, "You were really great last night. I gave your number to a few friends. I hope you do not mind." Naturally, my dad went straight from there to find and congratulate his brother on his good fortune, and hopefully share in the spoils. On the way, he noticed he was getting an unusual number of sly smiles and sidelong glances from the groups he passed. By the time he finally found my uncle, he was completely perplexed. Surely his brother could not have been that lucky. They were good-looking guys, but this was ridiculous. When confronted, my uncle flushed and stumbled over his words. He stammered and dodged the questions until my dad finally dragged the truth out of him. How had he managed such a prolific penile pedigree? He hadn't. It turned out my uncle had burned through all his money in the first few weeks and had resorted to desperate measures for cash. He had been working as an exotic dancer, mostly for private parties, and naturally, the word had spread. So, for the rest of the year, my father had to live with the knowledge that a good number of people on campus had effectively seen him all bare. Story 11. My grandmother was an identical twin. Her sister passed away before I was born. She did not like to share stories from her childhood, but she did tell me one tale of mistaken identity. One night, when they were very young, she was in their bedroom and saw her sister outside through the window. She started talking to her, asking why she was out at night, until she realized it was her own reflection. My grandmother had mistaken herself for her twin. One day, while looking through her photo albums, I came across pictures of her twin in her coffin. That image haunted me until the day I actually had to see my grandmother and hers. Story 12. A family friend was in the Air Force and, while in boot camp, became mortal enemies with another woman who constantly tried to one-up everyone and win every argument for no good reason. A few years later, our friend discovered this woman was sleeping around with other officers and got her discharged from service. About 10 years after that, our friend's twin was walking around town on the opposite side of the country when this woman suddenly barged across the street and started berating her, claiming she had ruined her life and all sorts of other things. The twin just laughed it off, knowing it was probably her sister's doing. Story 13. Not an identical twin, but I worked in retail for a few years and had a lot of regular customers. One girl in particular was awesome. She loved the product, always made conversation about what she was doing or had done, and we always connected. Sometimes she would start the conversation. Sometimes I would. I never really learned her name, which is pretty embarrassing in sales. About a year and a half after meeting her, she walked in one day and I waved. She excitedly waved back. Suddenly, a perfect clone, wearing a similar outfit in different colors, walked out from behind her. My jaw literally dropped. I had been talking to two twin sisters, thinking they were the same person for over a year. When I asked why they never mentioned it, one of them said, "Well, you just seemed to talk to me like you knew me, so I went with it." It was a surreal experience, honestly. Story 14. If you're a twin, you are bound to have a few embarrassing stories. My whole life has been a series of awkward hugs or ducking a kiss from a girl while yelling, "Wrong one, wrong one." Brother's girlfriend jumps in your lap while you're watching a movie. It happens. My personal favorite involves situations caused by mistaken identity with my brother, now that he is a Marine officer. I joined the Peace Corps shortly after he became an officer. Yes, we are basically a sitcom setup, and worked as a teacher in Eastern Europe. One evening, over drinks during a dinner with friends of my host family, one of the gentlemen mentioned that he used to be a Soviet helicopter pilot and asked if I would like to see his uniform. He brought down the full outfit, medals and all, and let me try it on. We are almost exactly the same size. Thinking it was really cool, I posted a picture online, wearing it to show everyone. A few days later, my brother called me, absolutely furious, because during his security clearance screening, someone had found pictures of him wearing perfectly tailored Soviet regalia. He yelled at me for getting brass up his A and complained that his clearance might be postponed. We still laugh about it. Story 15. Not me, but a good friend is a twin. I only know one of the twins well and have spoken to his brother maybe twice in 15 years. My friend is the wild twin, while his brother is very laid back. I live in a big town of over 100,000 people, with plenty of pubs and clubs. Over the course of a few months, my friend ended up getting barred from most of them and started drinking out of town. His twin did not realize how bad it had gotten until one night he went out with his wife and the bouncers let him in anywhere, much to his wife's fury. The twin tried to explain to the bouncers, "It's not me, it's my twin," but it did not work at all. The situation was eventually resolved when he called his brother and had him come into town to visit every bar and explain to the bouncers that he was not the band twin. The bouncers checked his ID, kept the ban on my friend, and let his twin enjoy his night. One bouncer even joked to both of them that he had heard that story hundreds of times, but never thought he would actually see it happen. Story 16. When I used to live at home with my parents and sister, I was blow-drying my hair in the bathroom. I was in my bra and underwear because it gets hot in there, and I had just gotten out of the shower. I cracked the door an inch to get some air and was busy drying my hair when I saw my sister's boyfriend coming in. He hadn't been over before. I said, hey. And when I turned, he completely freaked out because he thought I was my sister. He had been waiting at the door until my sister noticed him, but it backfired. It obviously wasn't her, it was me. It was more embarrassing for him because he felt bad. Honest mistake. Other times when I'm out, people will come up and hug me out of nowhere. I love hugs, but it's more embarrassing for them when they realize I'm not my sister. I don't think it's a big deal, but they're always so apologetic. Story 17. My brother and I both entered the science fair. Before the award ceremony, he got sick, so I went with just my mom. My brother won first place, and I didn't place at all. When they called his name, my mom made me go up for him. I stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of friends and teachers clapping for me, while a medal was hung over my shoulders and a certificate was shoved into my hands. In that moment, I should have felt proud of my brother, but instead I started crying on stage and weirded everybody out. People must have assumed I was overwhelmed with happiness because even when I stepped off the stage and made a beeline for the back door, they continued to congratulate me and try to shake my hand. Congratulations, my twin's name. It was such a bizarre emotion, a mix of jealousy and shame. I walked straight to the back, past my mom, and left. Story 18. I actually experienced the reverse of this in high school. I embarrassingly mistook one twin for the other. I was in the same class as Phil throughout all of primary school. I'm from the UK, and then ended up in the same form class as his twin brother, Alan, throughout high school. Everyone except me seemed to be able to tell them apart. They looked really similar. One day in high school, I was in a science class with Alan. Keep in mind, this was a mixed class, so we were not with our usual form groups, and I was seated at the same table as him and another student. The other student mentioned how similar they looked and how he used to get them mixed up in primary school. I piped up, "Really?" I figured out how to tell them apart because I remember that Phil always had a longer and chubbier face. Haha. They both stared at me like I was an idiot until Alan shouted, "I am Phil. We've been in the same science class all year." I hadn't even realized and had just assumed it was Alan. Everyone continued to think I was pretty stupid. Story 19. Here's my mistaken identity story involving my identical twin brother. We both attended the same university a long time ago but had different majors, so our daily schedules rarely overlapped. School routine started, and I was regularly attending music classes. Over time, I began chatting with a cute saxophone player. We were getting along really well, but after a short while, I noticed a noticeable cooling of her attitude. I shrugged it off, assuming she was sending me the back off, not interested message, and carried on with my other friends. Life goes on. So many fish in the sea, etc. Fast forward 4 years to graduation day. My brother and I were dressed identically in our caps and gowns for the ceremony. We stood side by side while our proud parents took our picture. For adult twins, this was about as identical as you can get without being creepy or awkward. Suddenly I hear, "Oh my God, I thought you were the biggest snob. You talked to me in the band room like we were best friends and then ignored me in the science building like you didn't want anything to do with me." It was that saxophone player. By this point, we were both in different relationships, and school was over, so there was no real point in pursuing anything. Still, it was a good laugh, and makes for a great anecdote. Story 20. I got my brother in trouble once with his first sergeant when I went to pick him up from his base after flying home on R&R. I was still in uniform and a friend had picked me up from the airport, SeaTac, and driven me to his base, Fort Lewis. They're not that far apart. After arriving at the base, I went to my brother's unit and asked if he was around. The staff just stared at me like I was crazy. One of them ran off to grab his sergeant, and this went on until I finally made it to his first sergeant. When I reached the first sergeant, he completely lost it, grilling me for not wearing the right patch and for wearing a combat badge. I laughed and then explained that I was his twin. Just as I finished, my brother walked in. Watching their jaws drop and heads move back and forth was absolutely priceless. Story 21. Oh, there are a few, but one of the more memorable ones happened in high school. I was just walking through the halls between classes when a guy I sort of knew rounded the corner and started walking toward me. I gave the classic lazy wave to acknowledge him, but his expression hardened. He flipped me off and began yelling about how mad he was at me. This guy was normally pretty jolly, and we barely spoke, so I was completely caught off guard. He continued his verbal assault until I was out of earshot. When I got home, I told my brother what had happened. It turned out they had a big argument in gym class earlier, and the guy was still fuming. He had just mistaken me for my brother. Another time, I was staying at a hotel with some friends, my brother and his girlfriend. My brother was in the bathroom, and it was dark with most people asleep. I was brushing my teeth or something and sat on the bed my brother and his girlfriend were sharing. His girlfriend sat up and started to hug me before realizing I wasn't my brother and recoiling. We laughed it off and still laugh about it today, but there was a moment of awkwardness. I have more stories. Being a twin is fun, so let me know if you want to hear them. We switched classes on more than one occasion, but only once did we get caught, and I still cringe thinking about it. Basically, we had nothing important going on in most of our classes except for turning in an essay, so we gave each other our papers and decided to switch classes for a day. It turned out that we had to write a reflection on the paper we were submitting, but we had each other's papers. My brother tried to play it cool, pretending to be me as he walked into his class to turn it in. Unfortunately, high schoolers are idiots, and the moment he opened the door, a kid yelled in front of the teacher, "Did you get caught?" I looked at the previously unassuming teacher, and she had clearly figured it out. She gave me an absolute death glare, then silently motioned for us to swap papers. I switched with him, and she didn't say anything. Just shook her head in disappointment and continued with class. Torture. Story 22. I'm an identical twin, and my first husband was also a twin. You'd think I'd have tons of stories, but I really only have two. Warning, the first one is pretty stupid. When he and I were dating in college, we loved to dress identically, matching plaid shirts and all. People would sarcastically ask, "What are you guys, twins?" And we'd just laugh hysterically at them, because we were just not to each other. I told you, that one's stupid. The next one is actually pretty embarrassing. When we were planning to get married, our pastor, who was going to officiate the wedding, asked us to tell her the story of how we had met. So we did. It was our first day in college, and my roommate and I had assigned seats next to each other in assembly. We were sitting there admiring all the boys around us and making comments, like you do. She pointed out a guy down at the front, and I remarked that I recognized him because I had seen his twin around campus, and his twin was actually a lot hotter. A few seconds later, some guy plopped down in the seat next to me, and it was the hot twin, my future husband. That's how we met, and that's the story we told our pastor. We never in a million years imagined she would be so tactless as to retell that story in her opening remarks at our wedding. Yes, with my husband's twin brother, the unhot twin, standing less than 5 feet away as best man, and his wife in the front row of the church. They were both deeply humiliated and barely spoke to us afterward. Story 23. I look basically identical to my sister. We're twins, and her boyfriend did a few very embarrassing things when he didn't really know me, not realizing I wasn't her. Our style is very similar, and we live in the same house, so it can get really confusing. One day, when she wasn't at home, he came in and started kissing me and touching me down there, while I was only wearing underwear. I was so shocked I couldn't say a word. After what felt like forever, probably about 30 seconds, I pushed him back and told him the truth. He felt terrible and immediately left the house. We never talked about it again. Probably for like 30 seconds. Story 24. Similar to the story at the top, I was going to a restaurant with my wife. While we were waiting for a table, a guy across the way kept staring at me. I knew something had to be up. I've had the occasional classmate mistake me for my brother. We went to different colleges. For reference, we live and work about 30 miles apart, and this restaurant was close to where I live. So I walked up to the guy and said, "Do you think I'm Paul?" My brother's name. In that moment, all the tension disappeared. The guy turned out to be my brother's boss and thought I was cheating on his wife. I had never met him before, and his boss didn't know my brother had a twin, so we ended up getting a table for 4 and talking it through. I guess it happens quite a bit, especially when I'm wet in a pool. Both of our wives have hugged the wrong twin, but only in the pool when it's harder to tell the difference because of wet hair. Story 25. I had a twin in high school. We had the same first name and looked exactly alike, so much so that people thought we were twins. We just told people we were adopted separately at birth, and both parents had coincidentally given us the same first name. Fast forward several years, and a girl comes up and starts chatting with me like we are old friends. I'm trying to place her, but for the life of me, I have no idea who she is. Still, I go along with it. We end up getting drunk, go back to my house, and go at it like drunken rabbits. The next morning, she wakes up and we start talking again. She compliments me on my new place, and I tell her I've been here for years. She says something like, "Oh, you aren't last name of my twin." I laughed and said, "No, I haven't seen him in years, but I'll have to thank him next time I do." She laughed and gasped. We hung out a bit longer, then went our separate ways. I never did thank him or see her again, but it was a great mistaken identity story. Story 26. Not a twin, but I'm a woman dating another woman who is a twin. They're both gay, but my girlfriend is out while her twin is not. I'm keeping this story vague because her twin is closeted. They are professional athletes in the same sport. They have the same last name and different numbers, but people who recognize them often mix them up, especially when only one of them is practicing or at industry events. I was with my girlfriend while she was practicing and her twin wasn't there that day. A fan came up and asked if I was my girlfriend's friend, referring to her by last name. I politely said, "Oh, actually, I'm her partner," and the fan seemed a bit taken aback, but whatever. I'm used to that by now. When my girlfriend finished her practice, the fan went up to her and chatted. When she got back to me, she was slightly annoyed and rolled her eyes. Ugh, so annoying. The fan asked for my autograph but thought I was my twin. I hate when that happens. I just signed it anyway, pretending to be her. It's easier than correcting them and making it awkward. Whoops! Story 27. I'm not a twin. I'm 2 years older than my brother, but we used to get mistaken for each other all the time. People would call me by his name, greet me, and start conversations with me, convinced I was him. A lot of people knew me from high school. Even though I was homeschooled, he wasn't. Probably the worst one happened after my brother went to college on another island. He has a very polarizing personality, which means not every case of mistaken identity is pleasant. I went to visit him at his university. I was taking classes online, but occasionally had to fly over for in-person sessions, and had only been there once before. This trip happened to coincide with my birthday, so I decided to take a stroll around campus after classes and enjoy some time to myself. I was looking at a poster hanging above a stairway near his dorm. It was advertising a cake concert that was happening the next time I'd be on the island, when someone jogging behind me ran up past me and yelled, "I frigging hate you," as he jogged down the stairs. I was kind of puzzled by the exchange since I didn't know this person and had never really been on campus before. I leaned over the rail and said, "Pardon me?" As he turned and started jogging down the second flight of stairs, he looked up and said, "I said, I friggin' hate you," and kept going without breaking pace. Since I had no clue who he was, I figured either he was some random jogger who got his kicks by declaring hatred for strangers on his route, or he really hated my brother. And unfortunately, I know which one is more likely. I guess it isn't so much embarrassing as it is bizarre, but it felt pretty bad to have a stranger tell me, without provocation, that he frigging hated me twice on my birthday. Story 28. Not me, but my two best friends from my childhood. We were drinking heavily one weekend. This was after high school, during my sophomore year of college, in the fall, and we're sitting around a campfire. The twins and I, let's call them Mike and Steve, were working through a bottle of Rumpelmans when Mike passed out. We'd been day drinking, and this was around 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. We carried him inside, put him to bed, and returned to the campfire. Another hour or so of debauchery continued, and Mike's girlfriend, let's call her Kate, came by to finish off her night. She had been at her sorority gathering and couldn't come to our party until much later. By the time she arrived, she was just as messed up as the rest of us. We were all 3 sheets to the wind, finishing up the night, and soon people started turning in. I put out the fire and went inside, only to find a problem. In my bed were Mike and his girlfriend, doing the dance with no pants. I immediately kicked them out of my room and passed out, not realizing what had actually happened until I woke up the next morning. I had actually mistaken Mike for Steve. Fast forward to the next morning, and the inevitable shouting wakes me up. Apparently, Kate had asked Mike if he had used a condom the night before, since she had been sick, and we talked about you needing one for the next few weeks until my cold goes away and my birth control takes over again. Mike knew what had happened right then and there, and needless to say, things were awkward for a while. As expected, Mike and Kate broke things off because they just couldn't get past it, which is understandable. Mike and Steve eventually worked everything out after a long period of time, and the 3 of us are back to being best friends again. But believe me, it wasn't just awkward between them. It was awkward for me too. I had to mediate my best friendship with two guys who wouldn't speak to each other and hang out with them separately, trying to keep everything together. Story 29. Not a twin, but married to one. I didn't know he was a twin when we first met. I was at a bar with a coworker who introduced me to a few of her boyfriend's friends. One guy in particular was really cute, but after talking to him, I saw he had a wedding ring. Since that's not my style, I basically lost all interest. A few weeks later, the same coworker invited me over for a barbecue. I had a couple of drinks and saw the same guy I had met at the bar, but this time, he wasn't wearing a ring. Confused, I asked my coworker about him and she laughed, saying, "Oh, that's his twin. He's single." I thought I had hit the jackpot. Honestly, what are the chances? My husband's brother still gives me a hard time about thinking he was cute first. Story 30. Not a twin, but my grandpa had an identical twin. My grandpa lived at my house for the last 5 years of his life, and I was a teenager at the time, about 13 to 18. His twin brother had died years earlier, but my grandpa had Alzheimer's and didn't remember that his brother was gone. He had a problem with mirrors because he would always see his brother's face and think it was him. We had to cover the mirror in the main bathroom he used with big sheets of brown paper. Otherwise, he would have long conversations with himself or refuse to leave the bathroom unless his brother came with him. One time, we were at Denny's, and he needed to go to the bathroom, so I went with him. After he finished, he was washing his hands and asked me to grab a paper towel and hand it to Guy, his brother, so he could dry his hands. I tried to play along, but my own reflection kept getting in the way when I pretended to hand the paper towel. My grandpa got pretty frustrated with my reflection for getting in the way of me handing a paper towel to his brother. Meanwhile, people came in and out of the bathroom, and I had to ignore them as I tried to figure out the situation. Eventually, I handed my grandpa the paper towel directly and said, "Look, Guy has a paper towel." Things were fine after that, but it was a bit awkward for a while. Just as a side note for anyone who might see this as a sad story, I see it as an amusing memory and a cherished moment with my grandpa, who I loved dearly. Even at the height of his disease, he was almost always in a very pleasant mood, with only occasional moments of anger or frustration caused by situations like this. Story 31. I'm an identical twin and have been my whole life. We did pranks and all that, but mostly we maintained our individuality. The only time I recall being embarrassed was when the two of us started working for our dad in construction, a gig just to keep the PlayStation games flowing. There was a Tucker box everyone on site would go to, and we'd hit on the ladies working there. They'd flirt back. No tip culture in Australia, by the way. Being a bit salacious was just how things were. One night, I was getting my drink on at literally the only club in town, a place that played nothing but R&B underneath the local RSL. The Tucker box ladies were there in fine form. I was catching up with them, hammering vodkas, and told my mates I was going to go dance with them. One of the ladies didn't even pause when she saw me coming. She was onto it immediately. Bear in mind, I'm not exactly good looking. I scanned my face into NBA 2017, and it made a generic white dude with an Owen Wilson nose. But working construction gives you a hectic tan and a decent physique, and that can bridge quite a few gaps. Anyway, this lady was on me in a heartbeat, dancing wildly. The woman I was actually interested in was nearby in the dancing circle, but this chick was all over me. She was gorgeous, and my friends were egging me on like I was some kind of god, so I went with it. Things were escalating hardcore. We were making out on the dance floor, off the dance floor, against a wall. And then she said, "Okay, my brother's name. Let's get out of here." My heart sank a little because I'd been trading on my brother's hard work. I was also super embarrassed. What if she thought I had deceived her? We'd never be able to go back to that lunch place again, and the guys on the site wouldn't like it either. I was full-on Larry Daviding at this point, but I owned up anyway. Actually, I'm Joabi Jojo," I told her. She just replied, "What? Who cares? You're the same." So I went home with her. Story 32. About 5 years ago, I worked at Steak and Shake, and my girlfriend at the time worked at Walmart. We both started our jobs around the same time and would share work stories when we got home. We each really liked one of our coworkers, so we ended up talking about them a lot. Skip ahead about a month into our new jobs, we were at Walmart shopping. She said, "Hey, I want to finally introduce you to T. He's working today," and brought me to her station. Lo and behold, it was the same guy I worked with and really liked. I thought, no way, that dude's name is Jay and he's awesome, except it wasn't. It turned out they were identical twins, and we just happened to work with both of them, be close with both, and eventually hang out with them constantly. One of them even lived in the same complex as us. Eventually, both my girlfriend and T started working at Steak and Shake, but by then we'd known T and J long enough that they didn't look similar to us anymore. Totally different. It was fun to watch other people get confused, though. In our defense, they tried really hard to be different from each other. Not even Facebook friends. Story 33. My twin sister and I were always in the same group of friends growing up. One night we had a big sleepover and decided to sneak out to TP, cover with toilet paper, one of our guy friends' houses where they were all staying that night. This was a pretty common prank among our friends and usually ended up being funny. However, this time it went a little too far. My twin was feeling sick, and for some reason, we all thought it would be hilarious if she pooped in their front yard and blamed it on his dog, who was known for destroying the yard with its poop. The next day, the guys mentioned the mess, and we tried to claim it was the dog. They didn't believe us, though. Apparently, my twin had left some used toilet paper there, and said, "Why would a dog use toilet paper?" Eventually, it came out that it was my twin. Despite everyone knowing it was her and not me, people continuously mixed up which one of us had done it. To make matters worse, this was 9th grade, and our middle school had just merged with another, so not everyone could tell the difference between us. To this day, people still bring it up and assume it was me whenever I go back to my hometown for holidays, even though it's been over 10 years. Story 34. I'm late to the thread, but I'm an identical twin. In high school, I was on the JV softball team but got pulled up to varsity along with my sister to replace an outfielder who wasn't doing well. I was playing, and my sister was pulled up but sitting on the bench as a sub. One day in practice, we were alternating at left field when the girl next to me, the one I had replaced, turned to me and said, "No offense, but your sister should totally not have replaced me." I just froze and finally said, "You know I'm my name, right?" She got really flustered and wouldn't speak to me after that. I was embarrassed on her behalf for a moment, but then I realized it was an all-around jerk move. The lesson here: never insult someone to their identical twin. I don't know why she did it. She had to know my loyalty to my twin is far greater than any loyalty I would have to her. My sister would have told her flat out that I deserved my position, and I would have done the same if the roles were reversed. Story 35. Identical twin here. I was a teenager walking to the parking lot from my friend's place. I walked past McDonald's when someone yelled, "Hey, hey," my twin brother's name. A few times, I turned around, and this beautiful girl came up close, telling me that she loved me, my twin brother, and went on and on. I was just so amused. Here was someone telling me I love you when I'm the quiet one, and my twin is the smooth one who's good with ladies. A moment later, I recovered from the shock and said, "Sorry, but I'm not twin brother's name. He's my identical twin brother, and I'm my name." That moment, when she realized she had been confessing all this to the wrong twin, probably after building up the courage to say it, was heartbreaking. She just stood there, confused, then laughed, and suddenly burst into full-on tears. I didn't even get the chance to tell her I could give her his number or that he was nearby. Nope. She turned away, ran like a madwoman, and yelled to her friends, "He was the wrong one! He was the wrong one!" while crying all the way back. I just stood there, thinking, what just happened? I bet if she reads this, she'll remember it. She was of Israeli descent, living in Northern Europe at the time. On a side note, my brother was pissed as hell about this mishap. Story 36. I'm an identical twin married to an identical twin. Side note, my mother and stepdad are also twins, though not with each other. One embarrassing moment happened when my wife and I were dating. I accidentally grabbed her twin sister. We're good friends now and can joke about it, but at the time, it was not awesome. I really should have known better. Also not embarrassing, but fun nonetheless. My brother and I were both in the military, though stationed a few states apart. One day, I was walking through the local Walmart when a massive bodybuilder-type guy shouted my name at the top of his lungs across the store. He then ran straight at me and absolutely slugged me, not lightly either. He had no idea I was the wrong twin and was furious that my brother hadn't looked him up since he moved. This has actually happened quite a few times. There are always fun ones, like the time I was in high school, 16 years old, and had a girlfriend over for New Year's Eve. I'd had a bit too much to drink and was hugging the toilet with my less than favorable friend Ralph. My twin brother covered for me like a true bro when her parents came to pick her up. He said goodbye to them and even swooped in for a kiss on the cheek. Of course, she knew what was going on, but her parents had no clue. Story 37. Identical twin here, and I've got a few stories. The first one happened back in high school. My twin brother and I rarely shared the same classes, which is critical for what's about to happen, since the teachers didn't know we were twins. One day, my brother was out sick, and his English teacher stopped me in the hall going off about how dare I skip her class that day, and started threatening to report me to the principal's office. Once I got a minute to explain, I pointed to my name tag and showed her that I was actually my twin brother. At first, she thought I was playing a trick on her, until one of my friends stepped in to back me up. Another story is more of an ongoing gag we have. Before we moved back home, we worked separate jobs in the same small town. Of course, we rarely mentioned that we had a twin. It never really came up in conversation. Often, we'd run into each other's coworkers. I had a tendency to just glare at or ignore his coworkers when they waved at me, thinking I was my brother. Now, some of his coworkers think he's an asshole. I have plenty more random stories like that if anyone's interested. Story 38. My twin brother and I were at a friend's place on a Sunday afternoon. He lives in an apartment right above some restaurants with outdoor seating. Important detail. We were drinking and having a good time. The next thing I remember, I'm throwing up like crazy in my friend's toilet and then retreating to his bed to pass out. Hours go by, and another friend arrives to help me get home, my brother having already left. I stumble out the door with my friend assisting me when we hear someone coming up the stairs. We go down and see that it's the cops. I was confused, but thought, whatever. I did nothing wrong. The cops started asking me about someone pissing off the roof and bothering customers eating right underneath. Instantly, I thought it had to be my brother. He would totally do something like that. Then they started saying that I matched the description of the guy. I tried to explain that I had just been passed out and that it must have been my twin brother. I got really nervous that they weren't going to believe me. After some talking, they left me with some attitude and a warning. Turns out, my brother couldn't use the toilet because I was throwing up. Story 39. Not me, but my dad is an identical twin. I have two stories about him. The first one happened when my dad was young. He worked as an apprentice for several years and became quite close with his boss. They were good friends and had met each other's families. When his boss passed away, both my dad and his twin, my uncle, went to the funeral. A relative of my dad's boss started talking to my uncle, assuming he was my dad, and called him by my dad's name. My uncle said, "No, I'm Angel KD's uncle. Angel KD's dad is my twin." The relative got really mad and started going off on him, saying that a funeral was not the place for stupid jokes. My dad had to step in to calm everyone down. My favorite story, however, is this one. When my dad and uncle were 12, they were little jerks. They went to the same intermediate school, kind of like middle school. One day, my dad was showing off and swinging from the balcony of a second-story classroom during recess. A teacher saw him from a distance and yelled at him, but he got away before she had a chance to catch him. Both my uncle and dad were sent to the principal's office. However, they both blamed the other, and each had different friend groups backing up their alibis. The principal called in my grandmother and told her that he wanted to punish both of them because he knew one was covering for the other. Well, Granny wasn't a pushover. She told him that unless he could definitively prove which twin had done it, he wouldn't lay a finger on either of them. The principal was annoyed, but ultimately let them go. My grandmother and uncle left the room first, but just as my dad was about to leave, the principal mumbled, "I know it was your brother that did it. I just can't prove it." My dad still loves telling that story. When I was a kid, if my uncle visited our house, he'd say, "Honey, I'm home," in my dad's voice, to try and trick us. My dad did the same with my uncle's family. At a dress-up party, they even successfully tricked their wives, but my little cousin knew who was who. Apparently, even as babies, we never had trouble telling them apart. Story 40. Not identical, and I'm a triplet, but my sister and I look very similar. If you don't know us, you'll probably mix us up, and even if you do, it still happens. We both happened to work at the same small retail chain, and one day a group of girls came in saying they liked what I did with my hair and wanted to know how I got my hair extensions to look so natural. My sister has a pixie cut, and I have longer hair. I instantly realized they were talking about my sister and decided to play it off. Pretend I was her. Tell them I just had a really good stylist and wait for them to leave. I was too embarrassed to tell them the truth because they sounded so excited, and I didn't want to let them down. I immediately texted my sister afterward, who was off that night, and told her that if any girls came in asking about her hair extensions, she should just make something up. Of course, they came back the next day, and she told them it wasn't her they were talking to yesterday, making me look like an idiot. Story 41. I worked at a summer theater once upon a time and was stuck doing laundry while everyone else had already left for the standing Friday night barbecue. The season was too short to learn intimate details about coworkers, like the fact that some of them had twins. One week, my twin was coming to visit and called to let me know she was parked at my apartment. I told her she was early and asked if she could see a guy in a kilt at the grill. She said yes. I told her that was Cliff to go say hi and that I would see her in 30 minutes. She had an interesting 30 minutes. As she walked to the grill, one of the scene carpenters came up, pinched her cheek, and said, "Hi, sweetie." She balked and backed several feet away. The guy looked confused, and so did my twin. My boss saw what happened and said, "Hey, V, that's not Bridget. That's her twin." V did not believe her and called me on my phone, presumably to hear it ring in front of him so he could catch me in a lie. He was utterly confused when I answered and wasn't even standing in front of him. Now, if you're not a theater person, you may not realize that theater people are very comfortable with each other. There's little personal space. During that 30 minutes, my twin got bombarded with hugs, high fives, nearly an affectionate grab, and even got picked up in a massive bear hug by a guy in a kilt. The mix-ups continued even after I arrived. One performer, Mikey, came up and gave my twin a huge hug. She reciprocated with an awkward pat on the back. I called to him, and he did a triple take saying, "No wonder that was a little cold and distant," before wandering off, profusely apologizing. Since this was the first real time my sister and I were in a situation where people didn't know we both existed, we thought the entire situation was hilarious. Story 42, identical twin here. When I was in high school, I took a course about law. It was a pretty easy elective, and most of the time we just watched Criminal Minds. I would skip this course all the time, and my teacher eventually got sick of it. He ended up pulling me outside the classroom and told me that if I skipped one more time, he would be forced to kick me out of the class. I understood and stopped skipping, since I needed the credits. Fast forward about a month. I tell my teacher I won't be in class next time because I have a dentist appointment. He thanks me for letting him know, and I leave. After the appointment, when I return to the class the next time it meets, the teacher pulls me into the hall and tells me he saw me on the school's security camera footage walking around the halls. At the time I said I would be at the dentist. He apologizes, but says he has to remove me from the course since he is in charge of the cameras as well as the class. I was in shock because I knew I had been at the dentist. After a few seconds it hit me that he must have seen my brother, so I told him I have an identical twin. He didn't believe me at first, since we both knew how close I was to being kicked out of the class, and he thought I was just trying to cover myself. It wasn't until I went back into the classroom and asked everyone to confirm that I really did have a twin that he accepted it. We all had a good laugh. Story 43. There have been a bunch of mix-ups. My brother and I were uncanny lookalikes until he met his wife, who fully supported his beard-related dreams and his wonderful, though extremely fatty cooking. One story. When we were 19, I was having a fling with a 30-year-old woman, and my brother was seeing her best friend, who was 28. I was downstairs in the kitchen grabbing booze, bent over looking for the vodka. She assumed I was my brother, who was actually in the living room watching someone play Skyrim, and grabbed me as hard as she could. I knew the woman I was seeing wasn't home, so I started laughing, which confused her. Then my brother came up behind her and startled her, and she was absolutely mortified. I was at a Best Buy grabbing a router for my parents when one of my brother's classmates from tech school came up and gave me a hug. He went, "Oh my God, Walter, how have you been? How was Arizona?" I had met him at my brother's graduation, so I knew his name. I just said, "He's good. He just got back and is living in Virginia." "Nice to see you too, Nick." The look on his face was priceless when he realized he had just hugged a complete stranger. In high school, one of my brother's exes used to glare at me in the hallway during my senior year and would make these weird growling noises every time I walked by. One day, she did it when I was already irritated about something, and I snapped, "My brother doesn't give a crap what you think. What makes you think someone who doesn't even know you gives a damn?" She avoided both of us for the rest of the year. A couple of the local college kids started greeting me whenever I walked around the city where my father lived. It was super awkward for me, being only 16. After getting weirded out by a few frat guys asking me about beer money, I finally confronted my brother. He walked into their frat party, and no one even questioned him. He grabbed a full keg, told everyone it was empty, and said he was heading to the store for a refill. Then he walked down the street, opened the keg, and tossed it into the river. After that, he just went home and acted like nothing had happened. There are more stories, but thankfully, his wild days are behind him now. Story 44. Not a twin, but I had twin friends growing up. One day, I was making out with a girl in my backyard after school. I'd gotten her shirt off when one of the twins appeared at the fence. We invited him to join, and though he was timid, he grabbed a breast and kissed her a little. She went down both our pants, but then he jumped up, said he couldn't do it, and hopped over the fence. I figured screw it, and we continued our fondling when I started hearing faint stomping, which quickly turned into the sound of a full sprint. His twin brother jumped over my fence, came over to us, and immediately joined in. She thought he was the original. Most people can't tell the difference, but when you're close with twins, it's easy to notice. We moved inside and had a 3-score until my brother came home, claimed the neighborhood girl as his, and grabbed her by the arm, taking her into his room. The second brother was definitely more of my friend. I later talked to the first one, and he said that when he walked in, all he did was think, "Shiver Chef is sucking on some girl's tits in his backyard and tried to get me to join in." I was told he said nothing and ran out the front door. Good times. Story 45. I'm not a twin myself, but I've dated a good handful of people who had a twin. Some identical, some not. One set of twins was nearly impossible to tell apart. Their faces, voices, everything. But they lived separately, so it didn't often happen that I'd see her sister. I went to her place after work. She answered the door. I kissed her, came in, and sat on the sofa. She started talking away, and I noticed she hadn't taken her usual spot next to me to watch our favorite game shows. I looked around and saw her frozen in the doorway. I asked if she was all right. No answer. About then, I heard the toilet flush and my mind started racing. I thought maybe she had some other guy over and wasn't expecting me. I started yelling, making a complete fool of myself when my girlfriend walked out of the bathroom. The oh crap moment hit when the girl coming out of the bathroom said her sister's name to the doorway girl. I immediately shut up and looked at the doorway girl, who was still frozen solid. Story 46. While I'm not a twin, my younger sister and I have constantly been mistaken for one from a very young age, since apparently we look very much alike. I don't see it, but whatever. One night, I was at a local watering hole, having a few drinks and chatting with a good-looking guy on the stool next to me, hoping to at least get his number. Suddenly, I heard my sister's name called loudly. I naturally turned to see what was going on, as another guy I'd never seen before ambled over and said, "Remember me? We went to high school together," in a voice carrying far more than necessary. I politely told him he had me mistaken for my sister, who went to a different high school than I did. However, since he had never met me before and my sister and I never really talked about each other in our social circles, he was very insistent that I must be my sister and that I was trying to play him. Eventually, he left me alone, but the good-looking guy apparently thought I was running some kind of game and stayed cool toward me for the rest of the time I was there. I couldn't prove who I was. When I pulled out my wallet to show my ID, I realized I had forgotten to replace it after putting it in a clutch the previous evening. Since I was such a regular at the bar, no one had bothered to check my ID that night. I did not get a number. It's not all bad, though. I've played the twin card a few times to my benefit. The most memorable was when my family went on a cruise and docked in Nassau for the evening. My sister had gone out bar hopping with her boyfriend and our other sister. Since we had no way to contact each other at the time, I went from bar to bar, asking each bouncer if they had seen my twin that evening. I hit the jackpot 3 or 4 places in when I was asked if she was accompanied by a physical description of her boyfriend and our other sister. I agreed, and the bouncer let me through. Story 47. Not me, but one of my buddies. We all work in the same restaurant, with the twin brothers in the back doing kitchen work. We'll call them Paul and Bob. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know drugs are everywhere. It's like a drug seeker's paradise. From waiters and waitresses taking Vivants or Coke to study, stay up, and party, to pretty much everything else you can't go without in the kitchen. Paul sold pills on the side. One day, one of the girls, who had apparently been talking to Paul about getting some, walked up to Bob, since Paul was off that day, and asked something like, "Hey, did you get them?" Confused, Bob thought she was talking about the food and said, "I don't see anything on the screen." And she said, "No, the pills." I'd never seen Bob mad before, but he flipped out. He's got kids and a wife, so it's somewhat understandable that he'd be upset about being associated with dealing drugs. But he started screaming at this girl. "Screw you and my piece of crap brother. This is the 4th time this crap has happened. Like, we have different tattoos, so y'all don't get us mixed up, and y'all are still dumb as heck and don't get it." He ended up making her cry. So maybe not the most embarrassing story, but definitely pretty funny from my angle and frustrating from his. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.